You know what's fascinating about startup ideas? Almost every wildly successful company, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Facebook, started by solving a problem that seemed obvious in hindsight, but everyone else completely missed at the time.
That's really intriguing. What made these founders see opportunities that others overlooked?
Well, here's the counterintuitive thing. They weren't actually trying to come up with startup ideas at all. They were just solving problems they personally experienced. Like when Drew Houston got frustrated with constantly forgetting his USB drive, so he created Dropbox.
So, you're saying actively trying to brainstorm startup ideas might actually be the wrong approach?
Exactly right. The best ideas typically share three key characteristics. They're something the founders desperately want themselves, something they have the skills to build, and here's the crucial part, something most people don't yet realize is worth doing.
Hmm, that makes me think about all those obvious startup ideas people pitch, like creating yet another social network for some specific group.
Oh man, that's what we call a sitcom startup idea. You know, the kind of business that sounds plausible enough to be a plot point in a TV show. Like, let's create a social network for pet owners. Sure, millions of people have pets, but that doesn't mean they need a dedicated platform.
What's really interesting is how you can tell the difference between those ideas and actually valuable ones.
The key test is urgency. When you pitch a mediocre idea, people say, yeah, I could maybe use that someday. But with truly valuable ideas, you get people saying, I need this right now. Think about how college students reacted to Facebook in 2004. They weren't mildly interested, they were obsessed.
That reminds me of that visualization you mentioned earlier about digging holes. Could you explain that concept more?
Picture it like this. When you're starting a company, you can either dig a wide, shallow hole that kind of interests lots of people, or a narrow, deep hole that a smaller group absolutely needs. Microsoft's first product, Altair Basic, was used by only a few thousand people, but those people were desperate for it. They were literally programming in machine code without it.
That's fascinating. But how do you actually position yourself to spot these kinds of opportunities?
There's this brilliant framework. Live in the future, then build what's missing. It's about immersing yourself at the leading edge of a rapidly changing field. When Mark Zuckerberg created Facebook, he wasn't trying to invent social networking. He just lived so much of his life online that he naturally saw what was missing,
You know what's really surprising about this approach? It seems to go against everything we typically associate with innovation and creativity.
right? And here's another counterintuitive insight. If you're worried you're too late to an idea, that's often a good sign. It means the idea is obvious enough to be valuable. Google wasn't the first search engine, Facebook wasn't the first social network, and Apple didn't invent the personal computer.
That must be why so many successful startups seem obvious in retrospect.
Exactly. And here's something else that's fascinating. Some of the best opportunities are in what we call unsexy problems, or ones that involve serious grunt work. Most founders avoid these, which means there's less competition. Take Stripe. Thousands of programmers knew payment processing was painful, but they avoided working on it because it seemed like such a hassle.
So, what would you recommend to someone who wants to position themselves to spot good opportunities?
Well, here's the thing. If you're in college, don't waste time taking entrepreneurship classes. Instead, study something rapidly changing like genetics, or work at a biotech company, or just build interesting projects with other students. The goal is to become the kind of person who naturally notices opportunities.
That's really turning the traditional thinking about innovation on its head.
And you know what's really crucial to understand? When you do spot a genuine opportunity, it should feel obvious to you, even if it's not obvious to others. If you find yourself having to convince yourself something is a good idea, it probably isn't.
That makes me think about how many great ideas probably got dismissed as toys or silly projects at first.
Oh man, exactly. The microcomputer was dismissed as a hobbyist thing. Google was just a research project. And Facebook was just for college students. Sometimes the unserious ideas are the ones with the most potential. You know what's really interesting? When Apple's Steve Wozniak showed the first Apple computer to Hewlett Packard, they rejected it partly because it used a TV as a monitor. It seemed too low end for them.
So, in a way, Being dismissed by established players might actually be a positive sign?
Absolutely right. And here's the final piece that ties it all together. The best startup ideas often come from noticing something that's missing in the world, something that seems obviously needed to you but somehow doesn't exist yet. It's not about forcing creativity, it's about positioning yourself to notice the obvious that everyone else is overlooking.
That's really powerful. It's almost like you need to develop a different kind of awareness rather than just trying to brainstorm ideas.
You know what's really interesting about that? The most successful founders often say they didn't set out to start a company. They just couldn't ignore the gap they saw in the world. It's like Paul Graham says the verb you want to be using with respect to startup ideas is not think up, but notice.